So welcome to the current edition of the conversation series of talks at IMSC. So today we have the great fortune to have Professor Himanshu Prabha Ray, Founding Research Fellow at the Oxford Center for Hayward Studies. So Professor Ray has been trained in Sanskrit and archaeology and has been professor at the Center for Historical Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, and was the first chairperson of the National Monuments Authority of Government of India. She served in this capacity until 2015. Her special area of research focus is the history of the sea, and is one of the foremost world authorities in marine archaeology, particularly the Indian Ocean world, which includes, of course, the history of the coastal areas of the Indian subcontinent. She has authored numerous books, including the archaeology of seafaring in ancient South Asia. She's also received the Anneliese Meyer Research Award of the Humboldt Foundation and is an honorary professor of the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich, Germany. So as in previous editions, this is going to be like 30 to 40 minutes of talk and followed by discussion, or as Professor Ray says, she might also want to break up her talk into chunks, and then following each of these intervals, she's going to ask the audience if there are any questions, any comments, right? We'll give a chance for discussions to happen, and then she'll go out to the next section. So I've asked her whatever she feels comfortable, and so that the audience can actually directly engage with her. And of course, after the whole event, we will have high tea at the lounge just across the corridor. Okay, so without further ado, let me invite Professor Ray to give the conversation series talk on the magic of numbers.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. I'm very grateful to Professor Sinha for inviting me, and to all of you for attending this talk, which comes from a very different perspective and is very different from what all of you normally do. So I hope what I have to say will be of interest. So let me start with the title. I've titled it The Magic of Numbers, Finding Numerals on Ancient Temples. But I'm no mathematician, that's not my specialization. I specialize in history and archaeology. And the reason why I chose this is for two issues which I feel very strongly about. The first issue is, you will recall that you will see that I put ancient temples here. Temples broadly defined as monuments, not necessarily Hindu temples, but Buddhist temples, Jain temples, Hindu temples. And the point I would like to make right in the beginning, and that's where my talk is also structured as the larger issue that I'm trying to address, is the fact that these temples were social and cultural spaces, not religious spaces or spaces only for worship. Of course, worship was an important aspect of temples. It always is. But that was not the only part of it. So please bear that in mind. And I do feel that we need to think about these the larger issues, the ways in which spaces like what we today define very narrowly as the temple was largely engaging with the community. Now, what does that mean? It also means that inscriptions, numerals, various presentations, poetry written on the walls of these monuments or temples were available for discussion to a larger audience. So what does it mean for controlling knowledge traditions? I would argue that in that case, knowledge tradition was not merely restricted to books or not merely restricted to texts, but was part of a larger debating discussion, and also was available to a much larger community than we often think about when we think of the past. So these are the two larger issues that I'm addressing, because these are the issues which I have studied and which I relate to. But one of the other things that I want to start with, and that's why I've put this slide of a painting. This is a magic square. It comes from a painting of Albrecht Dürer in the 16th century. He was a German philosopher, theorist, painter, but also a man of Renaissance. The other issue, and the reason why I've put this is the way knowledge traveled between Asia, Europe, back again, or between Asia, West Asia, Southeast Asia, Europe, back again, and so on and so forth. And perhaps these networks is something that we need to think about much more than we do at the moment. And the reason why I say this is that if you look at where this square is, I hope I don't have to define what a magic square is. Yes? Yes, no? No, okay, good. Thanks. So, thanks. So, coming from a historian, yes, thank you. I don't want to start there and get it wrong. So, the magic square is in this painting is up there, right? And what the painting shows, it's called Melancholia, and it shows this person expressing grief and sadness. There are many other geometric elements in this painting. Now the riddle remains, why? Why did Dürer choose this magic square, and why did he include it in this painting? I have not done research on this, but what is believed, one of the responses to the riddle, not the only response, is that this is an element of happiness, joviality, or it shifts the mood from melancholy to, uplifts it to a more positive sentiment. The reason, what I would like to argue and what I would like to think about, again, which I said was the movement of knowledge traditions. If you recall the 15th century, if you recall Renaissance, this is also the period when a lot of new knowledge from India is going to the West. The Dutch, the Portuguese, the Europeans, by this time are coming to India. Dürer, as you know, one of his other paintings is on the rhinoceros. The rhinoceros does not occur in Europe. But it was taken to Europe, it was exhibited, and Dürer saw it. So the larger question is there somewhere a borrowing, an element of novelty which he picked up from elsewhere? And is that why it is shown? I have no answers, because this would require a lot more research than I have done. But this is a thought which I thought I should present before you. Is there a sort of antiquity to magic squares in India? And the question is there or isn't there, or does it come to Europe? Because if you look at the historiography of magic squares in Europe, it's all traced to China. Maybe some of you might have another opinion, but my temple's back again. So this is a Jain temple. It's a Jain temple from Khajuraho. That's what the temple looks like. This is the entrance, and at the entrance there's the image of a yakshi, and the magic square is on this end of the entrance. So it is at the entrance. It's not in a restricted area, in a sanctum, or in a vestibule which people couldn't go to. And this is 10th century. So we are really looking at a much earlier tradition of inscribing magic squares in public spaces. And again, there is some discussion in the literature on Jain philosophy and the way in which Jain philosophy explained not just the construction and classification of magic squares, but also the reason why they needed to be talked about. And I will refer to the literature in a moment. This is again another example. This comes from Tamil Nadu. It's 13th century. And this is again on a temple pillar in a mandapa, which is again open. It's not sort of in the sanctum or hidden. And here the explanation is that perhaps these 3x3 magic squares, and the letters are in Tamil, but of course it's much later, it's 13th century, that these magic squares have to do with rhythm, with music, Because, as you know, the temples were not just, the center, but there were also mandapas where music and dance performances happened. So this is one of the explanations that is given. So the point then is that we have a much earlier tradition of these in public spaces, and I'm just loudly wondering whether there is a case to be made for a much wider circulation of this knowledge or of these traditions. But let me move on and talk a little bit about the literature. And the literature, of course, traces the beginnings of the magic square to a much earlier period. We had seen that the earliest on the temple is 10th century. There may be more. One needs to maybe search them out. But the earliest tradition of the presence of magic squares in writings occurs in the Buddhist tradition. And what is interesting is that, again, today we tend to divide religions into these sort of silos, Buddhist, Hindu, Jain. But if you look at the literature, if you look at the temples, there's far more borrowing, far more coexistence and sharing than the text would have us believe, or even the secondary writings would have us believe. So here we have first century Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna referring to the magic squares, and as part of the Buddhist philosophy. There is the Brihat Samhita of Varahamihir, which is 6th century, which then goes on and talks about the use of these numbers in the making of perfumes. And that's, again, a fairly early date for the way in which this whole tradition is progressing. Moving on from Brihat Samhita to the Jain tradition, 14th century, the Jain scholar Thakkar Pharaoh, he was at the court of the Khalji sultans in Delhi. He was also associated with the Mint, and he talks a great deal in his book about the construction of magic squares, and that's usually the topic on which a lot of these people, write about. Not so much what do we make of it, but how it is constructed, how it is classified. Is it to be 4x4 or 3x3 or something else? And also the fact that what it means in terms of philosophy. The final point, of course, is that finally in the 14th century, the tradition gets embedded that it was Lord Shiva who really gave this information to his disciples. So that's the literary tradition. But as you can see, it doesn't quite tally with our sort of visual tradition or the architectural tradition. And then we're not even quite sure how it took off after the Renaissance and where it landed in Europe. So that's all that I have to say about magic squares. But I will now move backward. And I was just wondering if anybody had any questions on this, because the next part of it, I would move back and talk about numerals and where do we start the numerals and how do these numerals progress and the archaeological data. Yes, thank you very much. The point is, one, if you will notice, is on the mandapam, right? So it's actually on architecture. So it's the audience is very different, right? People who come there, what is performed there, and what is performed there usually relates to music and performance and dance and so on. Okay. Now the other one is earlier. So there's a chronological problem. Is also in a text, which is then a different audience and is towards a sort of specific group of people who know Sanskrit, who know mathematics, who would be interested in reading the Brihat Samhita, who are presumably, because the Brihat Samhita has a lot to say on architecture, right? So it's two different, there's two major differences: chronology, audiences, and where it is located. But thanks for the question. Anyone else, or should I go ahead?
So according to you, like what's the earliest evidence of magic squares in Indian literary tradition? Is it like, you said it's earlier than the 10th century, so
Yeah, this one. First, the Buddhist philosopher.
that's first century.
That's first century. But see, so we're looking at two parallel kind of sources of information. One is coming from literature and is coming from the literary people who are writing in specific languages, Sanskrit, Pali, Prakrit, in case of Jains. And there are that many people they are writing for. Okay. And there's a second source, which is the visual source, which is coming from monuments, from temples, which are open to everybody, should one say. So if I were to give a sort of contemporary example, it would be like historians of JNU writing for each other. And then maybe people like Amitabh Ghosh or somebody, Dalrymple or some others writing for, history for a much larger public audience. So there won't be, you need to think of two different audiences and two different parallel streams of source material. Does that make sense?
Right. So you said that the West normally fits the arrival of the lighter squares to Europe from China. So when is the earliest detail at among squares in China?
That's quite early. They date it, to China. In China, they say it occurs in the first millennium BCE.
So this is a sharp.
Yes, yeah. So they, that's where they start. But it's partly also, I think it's linked to the question of how we trace knowledge traditions. And as you know, these may or may not reflect what is available in the sources, but reflects much more the propensity of the people writing it and what they would like to believe.
Yes.
Sorry. So, okay. Yeah, thanks. But thank you very much. So let's move on. So let's move from here to looking at numerals. And what then is the relationship between writing and numerals? Now, writing, as you know, the earliest is the Indus. It is 3rd millennium BCE, Harappan script, which is not yet deciphered. So finding numerals in the Indus script is not easy, and it's difficult to find these numerals. But if we look at the urban architecture of the Harappans, the amount of surveying, the geometric planning, the measurements, and so on, there's a fair amount of geometry and mathematics, I would argue, involved. The other question, which I would also like to raise, the other larger question, is this one. What if we look at the Harappan script? That's 3rd, 2nd millennium BCE, and by 1st millennium BCE, it is argued that nothing survives. And then you have the Brahmi, which comes up around a gap, say, of at least 1,000 years, if not more, if you take the new dates, which is 6th century BCE. So there's a gap. So what happens? Did writing, numerals, under the knowledge of geometry, did it disappear? What happened in between? So this is an issue which I think interests me, and this is an issue which I would also like to raise out here. So I will start with the Harappans, what the Harappan material is. I would like to spend some time on this last bit, the megalithic cultures of peninsular India. And when I'm talking about of peninsular India, I'm looking at Karnataka, Andhra, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala, not just Tamil Nadu. The dates are 1500 BCE. So in a certain way, if you look at the dates and if you look at the chronology, did this fit in here as the sort of connecting point between the Harappans and the Brahmi? So that's a question. That's the larger question. but let's see if we reach anywhere at the end of the talk. So briefly then, we don't have numerals, or we haven't identified numerals in the Indus script, but we do have this a decimal scale, which is 3.35 centimeters or 1.32 inches from Mohenjo-daro. There's also a bronze rod, which comes from Lothal in Gujarat. So we do have these scales, which shows that some way that measurements were being taken, and that the decimal scale was being followed. There's also cubical weights, which you see out there. These have been found at, they are graded, and they have been found at a large number of sites. There are this is a disc from Mohenjo-daro. Again, it's not clear what this disc would have been used for counting, for divination, prayers like a rosary, or keeping track of chronologies, or, accounting. We don't really have answers to this, though we do have the material evidence, and it does seem to suggest that numerals would have existed, but in what form, we do not know. They do come up in the Brahmi script, but in the Brahmi script, again, 6th century BCE, the question is, how did they arrive at these numerals? Were these letters, which were then sort of tweaked to look like numerals? But then there is no sort of correspondence between all the numerals and all the letters. So there's no one-to-one correspondence there. So clearly, that only solves half our problem. Some scholars have argued that there were borrowings from other scripts. That's been, even for Brahmi, that's been a sort of an assumption that has often been made, that it was borrowed from some other scripts, and it came from Armenia, or so on and so forth, from the Achaemenian script and so on. So there's always that assumption that it came from the West, and that the script itself, the Brahmi script itself, was borrowed. But again, this has been countered by new archaeological data, which does show very early dates for Brahmi, and a lot of this is coming from Tamil sites. The other point is, was this a continuation of earlier writing? Whether this is prehistoric writing, is it Harappan writing, or are these numerals coming from some other source? And the final point, of course, is that what were these numerals used for? So okay, fine. So they use numerals. The numerals occur in inscriptions. So what were they used for? And the point that I've already talked about and what I have mentioned is the gap. What happens between the end of the Harappan and the coming up of the Brahmi script? Okay, so this is a map which I find fascinating. There are two maps. So this is a prehistoric map, all right? And this is a map of the Ashokan inscriptions. Now, if you see this map and that map, there's an overlap. The overlap is here. This is Karnataka. North Karnataka, sites like Brahmagiri and Sindhanakola, all they occur in a cluster here, all in the hilly region of North Karnataka. And there are several of these Ashokan inscriptions in this area. These are also supposed to be the earliest Ashokan inscriptions written on stone. Now, if they are the earliest, they are located in Karnataka and not in Magadh or anywhere else. Okay, and Ashok, as you know, was one of the kings who used writing quite in a major way to convey his message to the people. So what's about this area? Why this cluster? And what about North Karnataka? And what do we know about the archaeology of North Karnataka? So that is where we go to this map. This map is a prehistoric map, so it shifts the chronology from 3rd century BCE to the Neolithic period to 2600 BCE. So it's roughly what you would call the late Harappans up north. And what this area is known for are ash mounds. Now, what were ash mounds? Ash mounds were really spaces or cattle pens where cattle was kept, and then the cattle dung was burnt, so ash accumulated. So over time, when many such burnings took place, there was a whole heap of ash which accumulated. So these over time became firm and were known as ash mounds. And when archaeologists excavated these ash mounds, they found Neolithic implements and so traced them back to the prehistoric period. So the area where Ashok chose to put his earliest inscriptions was a region well known long before him. It was not unknown. It was known already by the 3rd millennium BCE. It was known to the people who lived here, who used these for ritual penning of the cattle and for cow dung burning. But the Neolithic was then followed by the megalithic burial sites, and the dates again are 1200 to 300 BCE. So it sort of fills the gap coming up to Ashok. So the megalithic sites today, driving from the airport down here, I was absolutely delighted because I think there are some on both sides. I don't know if any of you have noticed it, but I certainly noticed it. There are these megalithic burials. The paintings are drawn on both sides of the road. So I was very pleased that at least somebody is paying some attention to megalithic sites, which are normally not talked about. So this is an example, or this is from this hill, Brahmagiri Hill, which I mentioned earlier, where Ashokan inscriptions are situated. This Brahmagiri Hill has the inscription sort of halfway up the hill. Then if you come down and on the ground below, you find these megalithic sites. If you actually walk the area, you can still see these stones all around. And when these were excavated, they found these cyst burials, and inside these was skeletal material and also grave goods, carnelian beads. Carnelian is not local to the area. It doesn't come from Karnataka. It comes from western Maharashtra, the Rajpipla mines. And also what was found up the hill was a Buddhist brick chaitya. And this hill has continued to be used. It's not that, something happened. It was only used in the Neolithic period, and then Ashok came, put his inscriptions, and that was the end of the story. That's how history books treat it. It sort of doesn't move beyond Ashok. But if you actually go and, it's not very far, I would encourage, especially the younger people out here, to please go to the hill. It's fascinating. The hill itself has character. I mean, I don't know if you'd have to believe me that it has character, but I certainly think it has. It has fortifications. It has Jain memorial stones. It has, of course, the Ashokan inscriptions, temples, and much more. Water bodies, water cisterns. So the hill continued to be used, and I think this is an important point. We often don't realize and don't remember that these spaces did not disappear. They continued to be used. Okay, let's move on to to what is the evidence then that there was any kind of connection between these megaliths that I've just shown you and the Brahmi. Now, I'm not sure if any of you is familiar with the work of K. Rajan, who taught many years first at Thanjavur and then at Pondicherry, and has dated the beginnings of Brahmi to the 6th century BCE based on his archaeological data. So it's pre-Ashokan. And it is then argued that many of these graffiti symbols, these marks, these are not writing as we see it in Brahmi. These are just marks. And these occur on the megalithic graffiti. But they also then, some of them, not all, some of them are taken over in the Brahmi script. This could be coincidence. It's not so difficult to make an arrow mark or, to use a sort of stroke to count 1 or 2 strokes to count 2 and so on. So it could be a coincidence. but does seem to be an overlap. But this is again an under-researched area. I'm not giving the last word on it. I think I'm just raising questions, and I'm saying that this is something we need to think about when we talk about numerals, script, and the way it developed. And again, you're familiar with the Kiladi excavations. They are on the southeast of Madurai, on the Vaigai River, dated to 6th century BCE to 1st century CE. And you have an overlap or a continuation of particularly this. That's the Ma in Brahmi. So some of the symbols continue, but like I said, is it a coincidence? Is it deliberate? And do we really see this continuity, or is this something that is not quite convincing? So I'm going to let you ask questions on this aspect of the megaliths, and then move on to the Brahmi inscriptions and the numerals in the Brahmi inscriptions. So if anybody has any thoughts on it, that would be a pleasure to hear.
So the questions are not on this part of it, but the Harappan scale, the scale from Venezuela that you show had a circle one at one end of it. You know if it had a purpose?
Yeah, with a sort of cross or inside it. Maybe, I don't know. Because it's, these are all, this is all fragmented evidence that is found. You don't see the whole. You see one bit of it. And what you have to do is to make a whole out of it. Now that whole often ends up by being imagination or speculation read into the material object. But the object itself gives us limited evidence.
And the other thing is that the Brahmi numerals, where they, at least in the texts, Sanskrit texts, for example, were they directly used, or has it always been in a verse form? Because there are many texts in which it has been used as some Khatapayari Sankhya or something like that.
I couldn't get that question. Could you repeat that? The last one. You said it's used in verse
Yeah. So has numerals in
yeah, that I will come to. The Brahmi I will show you. The Brahmi, yeah, you're right.
texts, in texts.
Yes, in as symbols is what you mean. Yeah, certainly. So yes, you're right that often the description of time, or the description of it's a description of a numeral. So saying 7, you could say that it's like the seasons or something, and then you're right, in Sanskrit verse that is how they would also use it. But yes, they are used, and I'll come to the Brahmi part. But I was just trying to get you on the megaliths, because that's something which I find fascinating. But the Brahmi, yes, there's lots of people doing Brahmi, but the megaliths and the Neolithic overlap and Karnataka, and that's something which I find really fascinating. So any takers on that, or any suggestions, or any ideas or any thoughts? Okay.
Yeah, well, people think about it. I have a question about this actually. So, for Venus also, all this period history, when did Venus develop from what is marks?
Yeah.
So there are, like the 4th PG fee, so on as as mark. So some people would argue that some of these size data morphed into Indus. Like, for example, one of the things that you show, the second row, first horn, that is actually very similar to what in the sign.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's a lot of debate. Like, for example, a few years back, where the Haxid is covered, and Mahadevan claimed that one of the signs was actually a proto Tamil Brahmi symbol, whereas other archaeologists will say it's just a notch.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a lot of subjectivity involved. And how do you actually figure any objective way of distinguishing that are these just symbols and others just graphic universals? As you say, an arrow is an arrow. It takes no big invention to think of an arrow as an osmo symbol, as a graphic marker. So how is it possible to tell?
Yeah, thanks. No, it has been possible, because there has been work which was done. See, one of the things to do would be to take one burial site and to see what kind of marks are there on pots, the graffiti that you're talking about on pottery, these are in burials on pots and occur from many burials. But if one were to isolate one burial, and this has been done by a scholar writing in 1939, and I can give you the reference of Ray, where he tries to show that it's the same mark which occurs in one particular burial. So, and he's arguing that this was, it was kin relationship that they were trying to show through this use of graffiti. So it is possible, and you're right. B.B. Lal at one stage argued that these the Harappan marks, and it continued into Brahmi. But there's also the whole debate, not just debate, the position that Mark Kanoya takes, who has excavated a lot of Harappan sites, particularly in Pakistan, where the point you made earlier that it starts with graffiti and then morphs into script, and so the people who controlled the graffiti or controlled the writing were people in cities, and hence the script or the writing originated in the cities. So it is possible to do it, but you have to do excavations very carefully, and you have to document your data very carefully and in context. Because otherwise, if you put it like this on a screen, this can be anything. It doesn't make any sense. But if I were to show, one burial and show how many marks occur in that particular burial and what happens in that area after the megaliths, does it continue in that area or not? Is it that pottery which continues? So it is possible, but you have to do excavations very carefully. And unfortunately, well, okay, I don't know what to say anymore. So that's why I said, it's under research. It needs this you cannot do from published data, because published data doesn't give you all the information. So, so you have to hopefully someday.
I can see inverted in all.
Yes.
So like the first row, second last, and
this one?
No, just
the first row.
first row, second last.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, this one. But that's a ma also. Your inverted A is my ma.
Okay, so this is appearing in almost all rows. Just go.
Huh? Okay. Yeah. No. Where is it? This one. Okay. And this is a variation of that. If you twist it that way. But this is Brahmi, huh?
Okay, the third row, last one. Once again.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, and just above that.
Yeah.
Every row there is inverted. Yeah. What does that word? What is that?
That's actually a ma. So, yeah, this is Brahmi, huh? And when she would know more, when James Prinsep, when he deciphered it, he read this as Danam, because in the early inscriptions in Sanchi and other places, for Danam, the ma, and you want to say something? Yeah. So, so this is, yeah. But that's Brahmi. That is known. I want here. That, yes. Yeah.
And what these colors like, they get like a wish out in their worries. Has it really these diverse together and or is it just still a was formed with some pieces studying? Is you sure he's very
sometimes. And also, actually, B.B. Lal did a lot of work. But again, like what he was saying, that ma, where is it gone? This one. So, you see, you can compare bits and pieces here and there, right? But there have been... that's not often the case. You don't get the entire pot. You get small shards on which you have writing. But this also happens.
but one is trying to actually piece it together like a jigsaw.
They're not big enough to do that. There are some which have been done, where they're larger, but then you have a sort of longer inscription. Yeah, which usually is the inscriptions on pots are usually names. So it will be, or so it'll be somebody either giving, but it's not a sentence. There are pots which have longer, longer writing on them, but it's usually the name. It's not, but that's all Brahmi. And the interesting part, and this is where my maritime and my coastal comes in. It's not on this slide, but many of the coastal sites, starting from Arikamedu, going all the way up to Shaligundam, and this is what I talk on, but to Professor Sinha's group on pottery and potsherds with inscriptions. A lot of them are coastal, and a lot of them are, should one say, come from a Buddhist context. So they come from Buddhist monastic sites. And the East Coast has a lot of coastal Buddhist sites. So, I'm arguing that there's a whole connection there between the Buddhist monks and nuns spreading the word, spreading writing. But we'll argue about that on Monday. But certainly in Brahmi, yes, you do get that. Okay. Thanks. So we move on. And the question that was asked about Brahmi, and are there any numerals in Brahmi, and what do these numerals say, where do they occur, and what do they reflect? So one way of explaining the numerals in the Brahmi script is that they are for dating. Now, dating could be in regnal years of a king, which is often the case, and this was also the case in the case of Ashoka. Ashokan inscriptions are dated in the regnal year of Ashok, but which makes it very difficult to compare regnal years of different kings if they are if they're not in a continuous era. You do get it in continuous eras from the 1st century BCE, particularly the Shaka and the Vikram era. But there are also inscriptions which just talk about a dynasty. For example, the Bharut, it's from central India, which doesn't give any dates, but it says that it's in the reign of the Shungas. Now, what period are the Shungas? It doesn't talk about that. The Hathi Gufa inscription from Orissa, it chronicles year by year, what happened So the point I'm making is that there are many ways in which dates are expressed, not only, in a, like what we do in sort of one continuous era, but it is broken up into many, many different ways in different parts of the country. And that is one of the reasons why dating and political dynasties and their chronology has been a very vexed subject in Indian history. And then, of course, we have some of the inscriptions which use more than one era, and particularly the 12th century inscription from Gujarat, Veraval, which is a stone inscription, and it's a donatory inscription, and it uses, 2 or 3, at least 4 eras of the Hijri, the Vikram, the Vallabhi, and the Singha. So the point then is that there's a lot of variation, and this needs to be borne in mind. But certainly the dates are given in terms of talking about the eras or the regnal years of the kings. And the question was that whether dates occur in Brahmi. Yes, they do. So these are the Ashokan, the dates in Ashokan inscriptions. Most of these are minor rock edicts, which I mentioned to you, occur in North Karnataka, and which I showed. They are the earliest, which I said, and they are from the 11th year of his reign. And they refer to, so I mean, there are various ways in which time is expressed in this inscription. So it talks about the regnal year, that it's the 11th year of his reign. It also says that, how much time it has elapsed since he became a Buddhist. So it says 2.5 years. Then Ashokan inscriptions, of course, these are not all the numerals. It has the largest number of numerals, but the numerals are 4, 6, 50, and 200. And you see, so this is 256, 200 plus 50 plus 6. So it's 256 when Ashok makes this proclamation in the Sasaram inscription, which is a minor rock edict. So certainly, yes, the Ashokan inscriptions do mention numerals. Then we have the inscriptions by the Satavahanas. Satavahanas ruled in what we know today as Maharashtra, the Western Deccan. And particularly important is the inscription of the Queen Mother. She was a widow when she put up this inscription, Nayanika. Her son was ruling, and she became a devout Buddhist. Again, this is something that if you read secondary literature and if you read about the Satavahanas, something you will always read about, the Satavahanas did yajnas and they were Hindus and they converted to Hinduism and so on and so forth. But if you look at the inscriptions and if you look at where the inscriptions are located, it's a complex picture. So Nayanika, she sponsors this Buddhist cave. I'll show you the cave in a moment. And look at the numerals which occur, in these donations that she has made. So it's a large number of donations, and so they are spelt out, 12, but it also gives in numerals and 1. Then it talks about 1,700 cows, 10 elephants, so on and so forth. So these are, it's not just chronology here. Here what we are looking at are the donations, the magnitude of the donations that the Queen makes. And the interesting part is that all these are on this very fascinating and picturesque site, Naneghat. This is a pass. This is a pass which links the Konkan, the west coast, the Konkan coast, to the plateau, to the Deccan Plateau through Maharashtra. And this is the Naneghat Pass, which one climbs up and then reaches, this is the plateau area this side. That's the Buddhist cave which survives. That's the Brahmi inscription. This is the view of the Ghats and the Naneghat Pass. And the inscription, as I said, is in Sanskrit, in the Brahmi script, 1st century BCE, and uses a large number of inscriptions. And this is one also of, when one discusses trade routes and passes and the relationship between the coast and the ports and the hinterland, Naneghat becomes very important because it links, the coast with the interior. But also equally important is the inscription of the Queen, who is a devout Buddhist and makes all these donations. Again, the Western Maharashtra is particularly, or Maharashtra and particularly the Western Deccan, is very rich in Buddhist caves, not just Naneghat, but also Nasik, 1st to 3rd century. And Nasik has a large number of inscriptions. There are and Nasik has a very interesting history because Nasik sees conflict between two dynasties, the Satavahanas and the Kshatrapas. And the Satavahana king, he writes that, he throws out the Kshatrapas and he occupies all the places that they had. And then he renews the inscriptions to the Buddhist caves. And again, we all use the Periplos, the Greek text, the Periplos, 1st century AD, which again talks about the conflict and the fact that the Kshatrapas actually tried to stop ships from anchoring in Satvahana areas and tried to, take them to Kshatrapa areas. So there's a whole fascinating history of conflict between these dynasties. But both of them, that's the fascinating part, write their inscriptions at Nasik in the Buddhist caves. So the eulogy of one of the Satvahana's rulers' mother is also there, and she praises her son for winning back the territory. But also the Kshatrapa ruler's inscription is there, which says that he took all that territory. And of course, in the process, now see the dates here. See the elaborate date that is given. It's spelled. It's both written out and it's also in numerals. So 19th, and then it says 19th. So that helps also, identify the numerals because it's both spelled out and given in figures of the year of the king And in the second fortnight of summer, so the second, on the 13th day of the great Queen Gautami Balasri of cave 3 above, and this is in the back wall of cave 3 above the entrance. So the point then is that here, one is that in the same cave, and this is cave 3 at Nasik, and again, it's there's a whole series of caves at Nasik. Unfortunately, the town is expanding and the caves are under constant threat because everybody wants to build houses there. So, but the caves still survive. They're nationally protected monuments. And it's in these caves that you find both the inscriptions of the Satvahanas and the Kshatrapas. And of course, the Kshatrapas are also well known for their coins. And it is on their coins that you find the complete set of numerals. These coins also follow the pattern of, should one say, Greek coins, Indo-Greek coins. They have the portrait. They surprisingly, they have bilingual inscriptions, and this time it's Greek and Brahmi. They are made of copper alloyed with lead and arsenic, and have sort of Greek inscriptions, not very good Greek, but at least imitation Greek. So I end there, and just two more slides. One is to shift to another source, which is manuscripts, not texts. We're not looking at published texts, but manuscripts. This is the Bakshali manuscript, which has the zero. The zero is here. And this survives in the Bodleian in Oxford. There's a lot of debate. Recently there's been a lot of debate about the radiocarbon dates of this and when does it date to. It was found in 1881 in what is Pakistan today. And we know that the zero symbol was used much earlier by Pingala in the 2nd century BCE. But this text and this actual occurrence of the symbol, the text talks about the symbol, but here you can actually see the symbol. But this manuscript, scholars date it to the second half of the first millennium CE, and the manuscript, of course, has a lot of mathematical rules and examples in verse. So I end there with the final slide. That's to give you that is taken from Richard Solomon's Indian epigraphy and gives the numerals that are found in Indian inscriptions, Brahmi inscriptions, not Kharoshthi or not any of the others. But I would also like to draw your attention, and this is where I started with, the temple as social and cultural space, and not only religious space, and the fact that the inscriptions there do not reflect so much the ritual that goes on in the temple, but reflect, what people around thought should be preserved. So either land grants or, various decisions that were taken. And why were they inscribed in the temple? Because God is the guarantor. And, what was inscribed there, one needed to abide by that. So with that, I end. Thank you very much.
So you mentioned that during the Satvahana period, that the rulers were predominantly Buddhists, and they converted.
No. Okay. Well, no, you continue your question. Then I will disagree with you. Okay.
When you are saying that these are, let's say, Buddhist caves, that these caves sort of start out as some sort of syncretic sites, and then gradually went towards one religion. So let's say they started out as a mixture of Hindu plus Buddhist sort of traditions, and they now survive as finally Buddhist caves, or was there some sort of changes in the, whatever deity is present in the cave over time? So
Yeah, no, thanks. Mostly what one sees is, no, these caves are certainly Buddhist. There's nothing. Ajanta, for example, what you're saying, yes, to a point is correct. Ajanta started, the largest number of caves are Buddhist caves, but there are Shaiv caves, above, which have been discovered later. Now, two issues. The point you make is very valid. and two issues here. Architecture or a cave, does it have religion, right? I mean, you want to worship, you go worship wherever, no, whatever the place. I mean, it has to be a sacred place, and you go and worship there. Now, this has to do with the historiography and when the caves were discovered, which was in the 19th century, late 18th, 19th century, these labels were given, which are incorrect labels. I completely agree with you. Because two things happen. If a space is sacred, it is sacred for all religions. Well, it is. It is. I mean, but today we are looking at ancient India. We are not talking about the modern world, huh? Because what we have done, we've taken the worst part of the colonial practice, which is religious identity and Buddhist and architecture, and added a whole mix of many things. So that's where we are today. But if I don't want to go there, we stick to ancient India. So you take any site. Nasik today, if you go, it's associated with the Sita Ki Rasoi, and there's a cave there. But the cave, it's not in this complex, it's not in this hill, but it's sort of, across the river and in the town, but it's a major pilgrimage site. So the point, and this is not just Nasik, I can give you any number of examples. So when a site is sacred, it remains sacred for many communities, groups, not just Hindu, Buddhist, Jains, but local groups. A good example is Karle, which is nationally protected Buddhist monument in the books. But who comes and worships there? The fishing communities who come from the coast, because there, that's a site associated with them, right? So the point is that it is a complex situation of diverse worshippers. But once we put labels, then therein lies the danger. So we put labels to the cave, and we have said this is Buddhist. Then we put label to the dynasty, and we have said the Satavahanas were Hindus. Why? Because the Queen Mother performed a Vedic sacrifice. So how can you be anything but a Hindu if you perform a Vedic sacrifice? But we don't see where did the Queen Mother write her inscription, which is in a Buddhist cave. You see, so this is my problem with labels. And this is my problem. And these labels come in the 19th century, and we don't question them. And we pick them off and then add our own, salt and pepper. And that's a dangerous combination.
Thank you for the answer.
Could you see a little more about how they identify these numbers? Is it a standard procedure, or is it just different each time?
Two ways. One is that in some of the cases, which I showed you, where it's spelled out. So it says 19, and then there is a figure. So it's very clear that, this is 19. So that is one. And in other cases, it's the way, it's the repetition, and then somewhere, you can make that connection, because they're often written also. Somebody at the back said that, it's written in words. So that's one way in which they've done it. But what they have not identified is where did they come from? Why do you write 19 the way we write 19? I mean, why don't we write it some other way? Because if you look at the inscriptions, there is no uniformity. I've only shown you a sort of sanitized version, but the figures vary a great deal, because the handwriting varies a great deal of the inscriptions. It's not always the sort of the very neat thing that you see. So there is variation. There is, depends on the graphics as well. But that's the way you work, we work backwards, that it's also written in words and then also in figures. So I hope that answers. Yeah, Ansha.
You showed some coins with Greek inscription. What is the Greece connection?
Thanks. That's a long story. So the coins, the Kshatrapa coins are found in Gujarat and in, that Nasik area, northern Maharashtra. The Kshatrapas are known to have moved in from, the northwest down. And these areas were also areas where the Indo-Greeks, they ruled. Now, who were the Indo-Greeks? There's a whole lot of discussion on, Alexander the Great came, he left behind his soldiers married locals, and then came the Indo-Greek rulers. So we know the Indo-Greek rulers from their coins. We don't have their inscriptions, and we don't have other texts, but we have their coins. And the coins, the interesting part is they have the portrait, like you saw in the Kshatrapa coins, and they have a legend which says, in Greek, the legend, which says the name of the king. And now this is a pattern around this time, in the early centuries of the Common Era, which emerges of having the legend around the portrait, which says who the ruler is. The only thing is that in the case of the Kshatrapas, the legends are in two languages, in Greek and in Brahmi. But the Greek is not sort of good, what should one say? It's imitation Greek. So if I, with like not knowing Greek, tried to copy what the letters would be like, it's something like that. And that has to do with the larger issue of what do coins achieve? And how do coins function as market agents in a certain way? I mean, would people, so for example, if I didn't know what a dollar looked like, would I accept a dollar? I wouldn't. I would only accept a rupee because that's what I know what a rupee looks like. So in many cases, when trade continues over longer periods, the kings, they follow the same system of coinage so that until they establish themselves and are able to start their own system. And this the British did. They followed the Mughal coinage till they were able to establish their own coinage. So this is something which has happened for a very long time, and it has to do with what one trusts and what currency one would agree to buy or sell or whatever. So the Kshatrapas, they are trading in the northwest and then using Greek because they don't want to disturb the balance and not to be seen as sort of these very strange people who use some strange language. But that route continues. Actually, there's a very important, the more important point is the route that comes from the northwest down the Indus to the mouth of, what is today Pakistan, the Makran coast, and then goes to the Gulf. So that route is a very ancient route and continues for a very long time.
So it's a Greece, maybe the Jews or where is the larger?
They are, because the coins are all of rulers. The language, the language continues for a very long time, but in the northwest, we have inscriptions, Brahmi inscriptions, which talk about the Yavanas. Now, who are the Yavanas? The Yavanas started as being the Ionian Greeks, Ionia, Yavana. There is, Greek rulers are said to have converted to Buddhism. There is the Milinda, Menander, who was an Indo-Greek ruler, but the Buddhists say he was a Buddhist and he converted. And we have inscriptions which talk about Yavanas giving donations. And then there are Tamil inscriptions which say, the Yavanas brought prosperity and so on. So I would argue that if we are looking at the period around 2nd, 3rd century CE, the Greeks are equivalent to what we use the term Firangi. I don't know what the local, but in the north you say Firangi. It originally started as a Frenchman, but today anybody whom you can't identify, you say it's a Firangi. So I would say, some years down the line, that's who the Greeks really are. But at some point, presumably they came with Alexander's force, but a lot of them would also have been from Egypt, not necessarily from Greece, but from Egypt, West Asia, because it spread all the way to the Gulf, the Greek civilization.
And just
Yeah.
I'm just continuing on the first question and the response you gave. So do you differentiate between scenarios where like multiple communities are coexisting
Yeah.
as compared to a scenario where, like, let's say one community is appropriating the the religious symbols or identities of another community? Like, because
Yeah.
I mean, how do you differentiate that from historical, based on just historical evidence?
Yeah. See, one of the problems of I know there's a lot of literature which talks about appropriation, and one of the problems arises with that model of appropriation is that today it is very difficult to say what the deity was in an ancient temple, because no images are I cannot even remember any image which is original, apart from maybe the Gudimalam Shivling, or, very few. No, louder. Sure. Yes, the Bodh Gaya. Okay, let's take Bodh Gaya. There was a court case in the 19th century where Anagarik Dharmapal took the Mahant, because Bodh Gaya by the 19th century was seen as a Shaiv pilgrimage center. But Bodh Gaya is a place where the Buddha attained enlightenment. And in the 19th century, there was a court case. Anagarik Dharmapal took the Mahant to court, and there's a whole, actually a legal case on this issue. And the end of the story is that there was a trust, which has, some Buddhists, some Hindus, and some, who are neither, and then that decides. So it is very, very difficult to say what it originally was. But yes, there are many examples of where they exist side by side. But there are, for example, another example, the Epsidal Chaitya. I don't know if anybody has been to Aihole. There's an apse. You know what an apse is? It's a sort of round, semicircular end of the shrine. So it's not rectangular, but it's an apse. And for a long time, this is the problem with labels. For a long time, it was considered that only the Buddhists built these chaityas, which is true, because there are many apsidal caves in Bihar, also in the Western Deccan. In Aihole, then when Ferguson wrote, he talked about, and this you will read also in secondary literature, about appropriation, the Buddhist temple being appropriated by Hindus. There were two issues why they said it was appropriated. Because if you see the plan, it's an apse. But if you see the shikhara, it sort of is placed very awkwardly. So at one end, the shikhara suddenly rises, like somebody has sort of put something subsequently. And this is what Ferguson said. But then you have a whole lot of literature when Gary Tartakov, he actually looked at the site. And that the temple as it exists today has a huge Mahishasur-mardini, which was not carved later. So there is a whole lot of, yes, in the literature, I do agree, there's a lot of writing about appropriation. Often there are cases of appropriation, I'm not denying that. But often I think it is based on one or two pieces of evidence rather than actually, re-examining it as a whole. And I think that would be very useful if somebody actually did it and actually worked out all the dynamics of it. But thanks for the question.
So on that note, let's thank Professor Ray once more for a wonderful talk.